Welcome back everybody. Today we're going to take a look at the file manager. That is, we're going to find it behind an interface and prepare it to actually be substituted with a different implementation once we go ahead and basically introduce the S3 bucket. But for now, we want to kind of just remove that boundary between videos and images, and we just want to manage files, okay? So for this, we're going to go into our API. Let's go into background services, and where we have the video manager, let's go ahead and just rename it to file manager, right? So let's go ahead, press next. This should rename a bunch of things, which isn't really too important. What we want to do is we want to locate the usages of this class instance, right? So where is this being used? Well, one thing that you could do is you could, I think in Visual Studio, you might have something like this as well, where you can see all the usages. Really what you want to do is you want to get yourself to like a little menu, which will look something like this, where you can see the actual places that is being used in all the files, okay? And primarily we're going to do this because we're going to, let's introduce an interface. We're going to introduce an IFileManager, right? And the file manager is going to inherit from the IFileManager. The file manager itself, I will just actually rename it to local because it's meant to work within the local ecosystem, okay? So the images get served from our controller endpoints, but in reality, they will be served from an S3 bucket, right? So it's important for it to be configured correctly. But nevertheless, let's go ahead and make sure that we are using this IFileManager in all the places where the file manager local is being used, right? So let's grab the IFileManager, and first we'll go into video background service. And actually, yeah, because I renamed it, it's no longer showing up there. So let me just research for it. And there we go. So first file manager, what's called video editing background service. Let's replace the file manager local with IFileManager. What we're then going to see is we're going to see a bunch of functions that are missing, right? So what you do now is you press Alt Enter or Control Dot over whatever you have in your ID, and you tell it, right, dude, yeah, you know those functions? Make me one of those on the interface, right? FFmpeg path, I'll just make this into a function because, I mean, I think it will be a little bit easier if it was a function. Temporary file exists. Let's go ahead and create a function for this as well, right? So slowly by slowly, we are building up these functions. One thing that we're going to have here is let's just actually fix this straight away. Get a FFmpeg path, we'll turn it into a function straight away. Next thing is delete temporary files. And there we go, right? So far, replacing the IFileManager that we inject into video editing background service, we end up with these 4 functions, right? And the implementations are already here. We're just putting an interface in front of this, all right? So once we got that, one other thing that we got here is this file manager local and these static functions. And I think what we can do is, can't remember exactly what we used. It was a path. Let's import this and temporary or get file name, right? So this path bit thing, we can actually go ahead and create an extension for this to kind of generate us these bits, right? So let's take a look at this system.io.path. Let's go ahead into our tracking library. Let's go ahead, create a directory. We'll call it extensions. And in our extensions, we'll create a class and we'll say path extensions, right? And in our path extensions, what we're going to do is this is going to be a static class, and we're just going to transfer some functions across from our file manager local class to the path extensions, right? So first of all, let's go ahead and grab these constants. We will just pop them here, and maybe they belong on the tricking, on the tricking library constants, but I think path extensions will be just fine. Next thing, from the file manager local, let's go ahead and grab all of these static functions. And because really this is an instance and we want to be using the interface. So if we have some shared functionality, we want to go ahead and take this out. And thinking about it now, it does, because we're not actually going to be using the path if we do something like this. All right, we aren't actually using the path. We kind of want to utilize that bit. Let's go ahead and take all of this. We're gonna go into startup where we have our tricking library constants, and let's create a public struct. And what's our struct going to be? Files. We're going to be doing file stuff. Let's put all this stuff in here. Right. Let's bring in the date time into here, and I think it's about time we actually, move this into its own class where it's not residing in the startup, right? So let's go ahead, close this tracking library constants. I feel like it's okay that all of this lives here. Let's go ahead, put a little space here and just fill out the stuff that's missing now. So temp file prefix, we can go ahead and actually create a proxy for this. So private string temp prefix, the tricking library constants, files temp prefix, right? So I will just put this over here, and I think this can be made static as well. And this can be static as well, right? Maybe just a second. Fields belong up there. Properties go underneath the constructor. So temp file prefix, just so none of this stuff breaks. We have a bunch of other stuff that's currently breaking because we moved these functions into here. We will sort it in just a second, but let's go back to the video editing background service. And I mean, this is the part where we will have to solve this, right? So tricking library constants, files, and there we have it. The function should be there. I mean, this is not really a constant, but I think more or less segregating it there is a little bit better than putting it on the file manager local. And I'm not a big fan of helper classes, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look at the other remaining usages, right? So file manager local, we see that it's being used in the submissions controller, user controller, and videos controller. Let's go into the submissions controller. I'll drop this down and I will replace this with IFileManager, right? And I mean, looks like it's still working. Let's go ahead, pop back. I use the keybind Alt-L-U, so find usages, and that means pretty much just finds the usages for me. We can also edit the code straight up here. So let me close. You can see all the previous tabs in Writer that you have here. But yeah, we can just go ahead and straight up edit the code here. So IFileManager, change that here, file manager local. Let's just remove the local here, and file manager generate profile. So you can see this is the part where it should be using tricking library constants and files. I hope this isn't a little bit too uncomfortable for anybody. The editing window kind of like down there, but nevertheless, let's go ahead and proceed using file to get save path. Let's create the method. So this now appears on the interface here. Awesome. And I feel like that is it. So user controller shouldn't have any usages anymore. Let's go pop over to the video controller. File manager local. Again, we can just go ahead and say file manager here. That will temporarily refresh stuff, but yeah, what other errors do we have? Save temporary video. Let's create path. What's it called? Create method. Create another method and save temporary video. We will probably rename this to save temporary file. Okay, and let's just take a look. Shift F12 to navigate to it. Yeah, I think we will need to adjust this whole thing with the temporary, and we can treat temporary files just as normal files. Okay, but again, something I think that we can handle later on. But for now, I think this is it. Let's check the startup where we add the service file manager local. Let's hide it behind the IFileManager interface, and there we go. Right, so this is the service registration. So let's go ahead, close all of that stuff again, pop back to the top and locate usages. And this is the only place where we use it, right? So we only register it, and then in all of our other places, we are just using the IFileManager. We can then check the build that everything's building, and so far everything should be working just fine. Next thing that I want to do is I want to introduce some file settings, and the reason for that is that with the object storage, we are going to be storing full URLs for our images, so that's the direction that I want to go in. So first of all, let's go ahead and get rid of these extensions that we weren't gonna use them anyway. And let's go ahead, collapse this, and we will add a directory. We will call it settings. And in our settings specifically, what we want to do is we want to generate a class. We will call it file settings. And for the file settings, we will add a couple of properties. Specifically, they're going to be strings, and this is going to be video path, or maybe URL. I think it will be a little bit more descriptive if we call it URL, and then image URL. And then another thing that we will want is provider, right? So kind of how Entity Framework has different providers for like either Postgres or in memory or MS SQL, kind of have the same thing. In our settings, we're going to specify what provider do we want to use. Do we want to use the local provider, or do we want to use the S3 storage bucket provider, right? In our startup, or not in startup yet, let's go to the file settings, and in here what we will do is we will specify a file settings object. And in this object, the easiest thing that you could do is you could bump to this file, you can drop it to a new window and slowly copy stuff over, and then you're gonna specify where are you going to save the videos, right? So, and then something like here will be the name, right? But we don't put that. We're just gonna concatenate it. Let's go ahead, add this a couple of times. We don't need this thing here. This will be image. Let's give this a little bit more of an API-ish notation. Let's grab the image URL, just the word, and the provider. And here we are going to have local, okay? So with this said, we now want to bind this, and what I will actually do is let's go ahead and close these two. That is fine. Let's close the startup. Let's close the file manager local. We'll open the Explorer. We'll go into background services, and in the video editing, we will add a class and we'll call it service register. And maybe these make more sense if they are swapped around register service, right? This is a static class, and this right here will be a public static iService collection. I think that's what it is. You can always check by going to startup and checking the configure services. So you have the iService collection. That is what we have here. So let's go ahead, add this and add file manager, right? And this extension function, you can call it services here. The convention with these is that this namespace from which the iService collection comes from, you generally just take this and you put it in the same namespace. And if you do have a warning, you can just disable it, right? So yeah, just disable it. You can no longer need to use that. If you can't disable it, I mean, get a better editor, right? Or probably won't highlight it for you, right? But anyway. So in here is where we essentially want to do something along the lines of, instead of adding the singleton here, we will just say add file manager. And all we need to do to configure stuff is we will do it here, right? Anything relating to our file manager, we do it here. Let me just put this down. Cool. So there's going to be a couple of things. First of all, we want to configure the settings. So let's go ahead and make sure we pass the configuration into here. So going back into here, I don't think we have configuration. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have configuration here. And we need configuration because we want to be able to extract the options and register those options to be usable within our applications, because we're going to be setting URLs left, right, and center, right? We're passing the config into here, and let's go ahead and grab the settings section. From the config, we will just hit section, and the easiest way is, because if we name the section file settings, all we can do is we can actually have static typing over this by basically just supplying the class name, and that will be, just fine, right? Then we can extract the settings themselves. So settings section gets, and we cast it to a specific type. So if you think about this, we're extracting stuff from the app settings. This one is we're casting that JSON object to a specific type. Okay, what we then want to do is we want to make this a injectable options object. So much like basically register these options, so this file settings, have it be able to be injected into different services, right? The way you do this is services, you say configure, you say what type do you want to configure, file settings, and then you provide the section, right? The reason that I want the actual settings in here is because what I'm about to do is let's create a public enum, and this will just help me in terms of the providers that I have, and probably better off in the constants. So let's create another public struct providers, and let's create a PCS public const string, and we will call this local. And we'll have local, name of local, and then we're gonna have S3, right, for when time comes, right? So once we got that, let's go back into register services. What we will do is we will say if settings provider equals tracking library constants files providers local, right? Let's put this thing here, and this is when this registration service happens, right? So a lot of the things in here that might depend on the environment. So for example, yeah, so get save path. This no longer matters because I mean it's a local service, right? It's not dependent on the environment. Basically, between development and production, the distinction is not made at runtime inside this service. The distinction is going to be made on startup based on the configuration. Okay, and that is what we're doing here. Else, throw a new invalid argument, or maybe some kind of custom exception, but let's go ahead and just say that's invalid file manager provider, and then we're just gonna point to what kind of provider is invalid. Next thing we want to do is basically make sure that we check against this bit here, S3, right? And for now, we will throw new not implemented exception, right? And we can say S3 is not implemented, but for now, we're the only ones using it, so it's really not needed to do that, right? So here we have our add file manager, and again, this lives just as one line, and it's an extension function, and we just add it here, and no problem, right? Let's get to the part that I actually wanted to implement by getting the URLs into these settings. Now what we want to do is, because the S3 bucket and the local file manager, they will be returning different URLs, right? And for production, again, it's gonna have different URLs. Now what we want to do is go into the IFileManager, and let's copy get ffmpeg path, and we will say get file URL, and string file name is what we will provide. And another thing that we'll provide is a file type, right? So we generally deal with two file types. One of them will be, what's it called? If we go into file settings, I think it's okay to just define the thing here. So file type will be public, or public, this is an M. What am I doing? Image and video, right? So we have images and videos, and we can just supply this type here, right? So file type. So these are the file types that we recognize. Going back into the file manager, we can bounce to the error at the top here. Let's implement the missing function, right? So here it is. All we have to do is just implement it. And the thing that we can do is we can basically also say, this file manager, what I need is an iOptions monitor, and this is how we inject the file settings, right? So if we open register services, the way that we configured the file settings here, in our file settings, this is how we would dependency inject this, right? And if the configuration in the app settings gets updated every following time that the service gets resolved, this is going to give us a new value, right? So file settings, monitor. Let's introduce a field, and for the file settings here where we have this, let's go ahead and grab the settings, because if this is a singleton, it's only going to get resolved once, so we actually want to make sure that we are rereading the file settings, right? So they're actually going to change. So let's go ahead and get the current value, and what we're going to return is we're gonna check file type, and we can actually, I think, so we can make a switch case statement here. So file type image, this can equate to a string that will say settings image URL, and we'll be providing a file name. I think that's it. We can copy this a couple of times. The last one will be throw what's called argument exception. Yeah. So, and name of file type. So we have specified an invalid file type. We don't want to do anything. We just throw an exception. And well, because we're making the code, it shouldn't do that anyway, right? So here we go. For this one will be video URL, and that is how we're going to resolve the file URL. Now, anywhere where we are just setting the file name on the file that we're saving, we now actually want to set the URL. So at the moment, I'm aware of two things. That is the videos that we save for submissions, so when we process them in video editing background service. So here where we have output converted name and output thumbnail name, let's go ahead, grab the file manager, and here we'll get file URL. This will be file type video, right? And the other bit, oh yeah, let's put this here. This will be file type image, right? And for actual profile image that we're uploading. So in our controller, let's go into the user controller, and here where we have the file name again, let's we don't have the underscore here, so file manager, get file URL. We just pass the file name because that's what it's actually already saved with, and image, right? So the URLs, basically now images instead of file names, they will be a fully qualified URLs. So now we don't actually need to keep track of URLs on our client. We just basically say, this is the image, just render us the image, right? So let's go ahead, close this. Again, as you're working, you're always opening a bunch of tabs, and as you're like, oh, where was I, just close everything, and then you basically have a blank slate, and then you can know what next part you thought you can focus on, right? So we have added these URLs. We actually want to make sure to, what's it called, amend our endpoint, right? Let me just make sure that the file manager local was renamed, because I'm about to rename the videos controller to file controller, right? And this is now going to be files, and let me just make sure that this is called files here as well, and then videos and images. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to specify type here /file, right? This is going to be file, and we're going to introduce a type. These don't have to be in order, by the way. I just put them in order because they are in order in my URL. So I'm just keeping them in order. So here what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure that we get the correct MIME type. I know it works anyway. I just want to make sure that this endpoint works more or less accurately, and it only works for the things that we specify that it should work, right? So here what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to pipe this type through the switch case statement, and specifically what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically compare it. Is it equal to, we have file types, and there we go. So what do we have? Image, and we can call this to lowercase or lowercase. And I don't think we'll actually be able to do this one here because we would need to be this more declarative, so this needs to be resolved at compile time. I don't think I could do that, maybe. What does this give me? This should give me a string, right? Let's do a little experiment real quick. Yeah, so that should work. Let's go ahead see if I can pop this here. All right. I think yeah, I think this is going to shout at me because a constant value is expected, right? So this would be a constant. However, I would need it to be compared with ignore case, right? Because that is going to have a capital letter there. So the other thing that we can do, I mean, this would be my preferred option to initialize this value in a more or less succinct way. The other thing that we can do is just take the type, and what we'll do is compare it to the enum this way. We'll still take file type, we'll take the image, and in here, we want the string invariant culture ignore case, right? So if it equals, we're just going to say that the MIME type is image.jpg, right? Otherwise, what we need to do is we need to compare, and actually I will need to name off this bit. Where is it? Yep, there we go. Let me copy this again. So once we got that, then we're going to compare the type to a video, right? So then it's a video. If it is a video, it will be a video MP4. These are the only two things we serve. Otherwise, let's return null. And if we will say if MIME equals null, we will return bad request, right? So you're basically requesting an invalid type. Let me format the document. I think that's all right. And now we can go ahead and put the MIME type here. And I think that is it, right? So with our image specifically, I don't think we will need to pass the MIME type, but again, we will. But this is basically just to verify that the images that it's requesting is one of the things that we are supporting, right? I don't think this is entirely necessary, but still, we are going with this way. Another thing to make sure is that the other endpoints that we might be using, that we do change the URL here, right, for our front end. So let's go ahead and do that and make sure that it all works. So let's close these, collapse everything, and in the web client, what we're going to do is Ctrl-Shift-F, so we can go ahead and search, and we can either search for localhost, but I think /API/video or videos or whatever it was, we can, I think directory web client will be better with the recursive search here. And here we can see everywhere where this is being used, right? So let's get this a little bit bigger. So first file, if you don't have this, I will basically go slowly here and you can go through these file by file. So default.view, this is the profile image on our, what's it called, on our navigation bar here in the layout. So, I mean, this is going to be just the profile image. So let's go ahead and get rid of this bit here. Next thing is the video itself and the thumbnail, right? These are just fully qualified URLs now, right? There we go. Let's save that. I think both of these will be invalid. The next thing is the profile index. So the previous one was in the video player. This one is in the profile index page. Again, same thing. Save that. Next thing is the video upload. So it looks like we have two of them, which is the delete and the upload. This is actually now going to be going to files, and this one will be going to files as well with a specific video ID. Yeah, let's just double check that those indeed were the ones that we wanted. So yep, post and with ID. And by the way, another cool thing, if you're like, oh, which files did I change in Writer, you can basically bring up a little menu which basically shows all your commits. And another one is this one, which is basically all your current changes. So, and I mean, you can do the same with Git, or if you have Git Kraken, you can also use that. So if you're just wondering what kind of changes you have done and have you actually did the correct change, because you see me did do that change for that little window. It was a little bit awkward, but now it's kind of like, oh, which files did I actually change? I didn't have them open, I didn't have them in my history, right? Use Git, use the tools available, right? And here we can go into videos uploads and we can just verify or double check. So let me go ahead and close this, and let me go ahead and grab video upload. And let me double check that I'm indeed using files against the file controller here, right? So API files, check the route on the top. Everything else seems fine. Yep, delete. Cool, right? So I'm pretty confident it works. Let's go ahead and give this a test, right? So let's go ahead and log in. Test password. There we go. Signing in. Let's go ahead and first deal with the profile image. So we didn't fix the URLs in our seeds. We will do that in just a second. First, what we'll do is we'll just make sure that it works. Otherwise, we'll have to refresh or relog in and stuff like that. So okay, so that is broken as well. Let's see. So we are supplying images and stuff like that. Okay, so in the file controller, here we have a file type image. So here you can see that we're saying API/file/images. Images is not an enum that we have. So let's go ahead and actually fix it up. So I'm going to go into app settings development. I'm going to go and remove the S's on the end here. What I'll actually do while I'm here is in the settings, file settings, file type, I will move the file type out. And for the program.cs, let's go ahead and fix the URLs here. So let's grab the file path here. We'll go into program and we'll just put it in before our files here. And this will be image. And we'll do the same for our previous submission so we can actually see it. And we'll submit. Okay, there's the other one. It's hiding in plain sight, right? And image. Cool. So fix that. We'll need to re-log in and etc. It should point us back there straight away here. Yep. So test password. Cool. Let's go ahead, check the profile. There's our videos. Do they play? So both videos and thumbnails are working. Let's see the profile. There we go. So we can check the fully qualified path. Again, if we actually go to tracking library here, let's go to create. Let's upload some kind of new video. Trick, backflip, okay. Submission. Whoa, right. Let's save this. I mean, at some point, I know there's going to be a slight delay because it's like editing stuff in the background. But yeah, let's check this. Forwards roll, nope, backflip. There's the video, right? And if we go into profile, this should appear here as well, right? So all cool. I mean, there's not much to test here. So nevertheless, file manager, hiding it behind an interface, implementing fully qualified URLs, and just a general cleanup and laying the path for how we're going to be handling files once it comes to the S3 storage and hiding stuff behind that same IFileManager interface. And all we will have to do is basically swap the provider wherever we had it. Where is this file? Register file, right? So moving forward, because this is such a the file management, it's like a little service. You can basically, if you're adding more applications into here, you can put it into a separate library, right? And just carry it with you. You've already written the code once. I mean, put more providers in there, open source that thing, you know, it's up to you. You can go to a new workplace and they maybe have some kind of other provider that integrates with some other cloud bucket or whatever. Add that to your file provider, right? And then all you have to do in your code is just switch an app setting, and I mean, it just works, right? So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comments section or on my Discord channel. I also stream on Wednesdays and Sundays. I also announced that on my Discord channel as well. So if you are interested in the community I'm trying to build, join the Discord channel, not the channel, the server. Anyway, have a good day. I hope to see you in my other episodes.